Hey everyone, I'm Kyle with Attended Life, and this morning I'm going to take you through some of our morning chicken chores and show you what the routine looks like with 60 birds on our small scale homestead. Along the way, I'll be giving some tips on setting up and taking down your poultry netting, specifically electrified netting. I'm using Premier 1. I love this stuff. It's so great for small space maximization and being able to utilize all the nooks and crannies that might be laid out for you in your yard, maybe by a previous owner, maybe by yourself before you plan to have chickens. It really can make any space work, so follow along and I hope you pick up some good tips from this. So the first move we're gonna make this morning is our 55 Rainbow Rangers from Meyer Hatchery. They're about 5 weeks old now. They've been on pasture for a week, kind of pushed through this netting. They currently are in chicken tractors that are like pretty secure, but after all like the time and money investments, it just made sense for me to wrap them up in this electric netting and make sure that these birds make it to the butchering date. We do have like a lot of predators in our area. We have natural forests kind of surrounding us, so it is not uncommon that our neighbors will have problems with raccoons, possums, little coyotes, things like that. So yeah, definitely add some peace of mind. So first step, always turn off your energizer before you start messing around with your fence. It will shock you if it's working properly. I've been shocked several times by it. It's not that bad, but it's definitely not the best way to start off your Saturday morning. So yeah, just always remember to turn that box off. When you start pulling up your netting to move, you really want to make sure that you're having clean folds and you're keeping the net organized while you're going through it from the very beginning. The biggest tip I have for this is when you pull up the pole, you're gonna rotate it to one side like this, have it laying flat in your hands with the spike on one side, the top of the net on the other. This will be great because as you move through and pull up more posts, that fold that you're gonna do to one side will naturally put all the netting together and fold it. I'm having a hard time explaining it with words right now, but let me just show you what that looks like. So you're gonna pull up your net post by post, and when you pick it up, you're gonna turn it 45 degrees either direction. Doesn't really matter, just stay consistent your whole time pulling up the net. And as you go through, you're gonna continue this motion by pulling posts, folding, pulling posts, folding, walking all the way around your whole net, and then eventually you'll have a collection of clean net that's gonna be super easy to set up in your new paddock. Now that you have all of your poultry netting bundled up in a nice pile with all the poles up top and the net below, you're gonna take it and try to lay it down flat where you plan to have the entrance to your new paddock. While you're working through pulling up your netting, it is so worth the extra thought to make sure that none of the net is tangling around the bottom spikes on the posts. This becomes a huge headache when you're unraveling it, trying to set up your new paddock, and the time savings that you have from pulling it up are definitely multiplied down the end if you don't decide to do that. So just make sure you're being aware of that. It becomes second nature after a while. Now that you have the entrance to your paddock designated and you haven't put up the posts yet, it's time to pull your tractors into the fresh area. This is something that's super important. There's been several times where I've gotten halfway through setting up my paddock, noticing that my chickens are on the other side of the fence. No big deal if you're just moving birds, but if you're moving any infrastructure, their coop, their tractor, you definitely want to get it in there first because you're gonna have to pull posts again, pull it in, and then reset up what you did. So yeah, just never forget this. It gets really easy when you get excited about the fence, especially on those really cold mornings when you're trying to get through chores. Because these meat birds aren't outside in their paddock yet, they're still in the tractors, they're a little too small for the fencing, they'll pop right through the holes. I'm not using the 4 support posts as boundaries like I would for fencing normally, to kind of set the end of the boundary to know where clean grass begins and dirty pasture is. So I'll go into more detail on that later, but just know the rule of thumb I give you later on this video doesn't necessarily apply when you're raising chickens like this. Now that the tractors are in position in their new paddock, time to set up the fencing, unravel it, wrap it all around, and get your birds safe. Just a quick note, when your birds are kind of around that 4 and 5 week mark and putting wheels on the back of your tractor might make a gap big enough for them to crawl out of, it has always been really helpful for me to just set the feeder inside the coop after 12 hours with no food. I do 12 on, 12 off feeding for them, free feeding during the 12 hours, no feed during the other 12. And when that feeder goes in there, they could care less about the crack in the back. It makes it really easy to pull. You might have to go in and adjust it so you can get that full tractor length so they're on fully fresh grass. But yeah, definitely keep that in mind if you're having problems with that. I popped up the wheel on this one before putting the feeder in just now, and I think I had about 5 birds get out. So the time has come to set up your fences. So to do this, you're gonna pick up your pile of netting with one of the ends of the netting on top, the other one on the bottom, and walk around and unfold it around your paddock. A couple notes here while you do this. You're gonna wanna set all the sides with stakes on them on one side of the netting, and then on the other, you're gonna wanna have the top. And keep that consistent all the way through so you're not jumping over between the netting while you're setting it up. Another thing that's super important while you're trying to set up shapes, especially in tighter spaces where a few feet matters, definitely you're gonna wanna take up slack as you pull it because naturally, as you create tension in the poles, staking them in, there will be some slack, so your area will be just a bit larger than you originally anticipated. So just make sure that you're able to account for as much of that up front as possible. But yeah, let's get this netting set up. When you're moving your fencing, it makes it significantly easier if while you're dragging out after dropping a pole, you let the net pull out the next pole from the pile. Because it's really tough to keep the poles in order of first to last while they're stacked in your hands, kind of jumbled. It becomes a lot by the end of the netting. So while you're walking, kind of let the net do the work for you and make that decision. And most of the time it's correct. So yeah, just don't stress out about it too much. You'll kind of feel it while you do it. And yeah, it's pretty easy to find that rhythm once you're in it. Now that we have our paddock laid out, it's time to get the poles up. And to do that, you're gonna walk through, step the poles into the ground, and just go one by one down the line, picking up slack along the way. Definitely do not forget, when it's all said and done, your fence is up, that you go around and put up your support posts. These come with a lot of the poultry netting that Premier One sells. It really helps with sag, and it overall just makes the net look a lot better. It doesn't sit on nearly as many weeds. Your battery will last longer. I love these things. As the net gets older, I'll probably keep stocking up on them because they're such an easy solution to maybe the only flaw that I've really found with electric netting is the sagging. So yeah, don't forget your support poles. All right, the fencing is officially up. This should be sufficient for them to move through here for the next week. And I'll kind of show you, this is like a really, really great example of where this electric netting really shines. So here you'll notice I kept it fairly narrow on the left-hand side. That'll give me the availability to turn the tractors around when they're done with this paddock and run them directly to the right of where they currently are. This is like a great space maximization thing, and this netting allowed me to push them up really, really close to the left-hand side of the image where we do have just tree overgrowth, some large mature trees, and places that just aren't ideal for pulling tractors through. And yeah, this really makes the most of it. To go into why this fencing is so great, as you can see here, it's really, really densely covered over this way, and because of that, Most fencing solutions wouldn't work. You can see here I have the fence pushed up. It's actually pushing into some trees, and I'm gonna have to cut those back, basically just so they're not touching the wires of the fence. If you have too many things touching the wires of your fence, it can short out your battery, run it dry, especially if there's moisture on the leaves. It'll just keep firing all day and night while it's going. So before I turn the fence on, I'll make sure, walk around the perimeter, pull any like taller grasses or like other native plants that could be brushing up against it, and just make sure that the trees aren't touching it. You know, if they occasionally graze it because of wind and you really don't want to cut them back that much, it's not that big of a deal. Your battery will be fine in the morning if you're running it at night like I do. But yeah, just something to be aware of. You don't necessarily want things touching your fence, but if you got to push it up close somewhere and then do some trimming, you know, the fence will allow you the flexibility to make those calls. Now that the fencing's all set up, it's time to take care of the birds inside. They have fresh grass now, but time to freshen up their feed, get them some new water, and just make sure everyone's nice and healthy in there. Before I forget, I wanted to address why I'm running my tractors like this. So they're currently staggered. I'd say there's about 3 or 4 feet of overlap with the two tractors. I noticed one day a lot of the birds were huddling up where they were getting like all the rays of sun, and I just wanted to like increase their sun exposure as much as possible out here. So staggering them allows sun to come through the side of the panels at different points in the day, when it's in its morning point or at night. So yeah, I'm loving the staggered design. I think it looks sweet, and yeah, it's worked great, especially in the tighter spaces, because if you move a tractor first, you can kind of scoot it to the left or right, whatever you need, pull the other one up behind it, and yeah, you can just take advantage of every inch of available pasture you have, because believe me, that is always a motive of mine. Now that you have your buckets off and ready to fill up and get water in, I always like to take this opportunity to do as much cleaning as I can within the buckets. Every other day I break out a toilet brush that hasn't been in the toilet, give them a scrub down just to make sure I break up any bacteria that's there from the standing water. And in between those days, I just kind of use the jet function to spray out anything that's in there with the hose. And then I'll spray off the little nipples on the bottom as well, just to make sure everything's as clean as possible, even if it's just dirt and stuff in it. But knowing how chickens are and how much poop they accumulate in a 24-hour period, it's really nice to keep this thing nice and tidy for them. Every time I fill up my chickens' waters, I make sure that I add some apple cider vinegar. I'll use some Bragg's Organic with the mother in it. The great thing about apple cider vinegar, helps their digestion just like humans. It introduces probiotics to their system, so their digestion of their food, they get more nutrients out of it. And I've also heard an old wives' tale that adding it actually makes their poop smell less because they're digesting more efficiently. So if you're on the small scale, make sure you throw some ACV in there to help keep everything nice and tidy and smell free around your homestead. And you don't need much. A couple drops will do each day. Yeah, haven't had any problems with it. Just always keep a bottle of this around. Now that the chickens have their water set up, they're on fresh grass, time to do the last step, give them some food, get the energizer set up, and then move on to the egg layers. Come on, Heel. I got feed. The true final step is setting up your energizer. You're gonna set it up right at the entrance of your paddock. You're gonna wanna make sure it's out of your walking path so you can go in and do chores easily. You don't have to move it later on in the week. And then tie up your fence and you're good to go. Now that your fence is up, now that your energizer is plugged in, it's usually time to hook it up, but my daughter's out in the yard right now, so we're gonna leave that alone. But if you are gonna leave your fence in maybe a more undisturbed part of your property that you don't have eyes on all the time, Make sure you turn it on when you're all finished up. And yeah, have some peace of mind when you're inside. For our egg layers, it'll be more or less the same steps. You're gonna walk around, turn off your fence, pull up the poles, stack them, set them down at the entrance, and then get it all set up again. The only difference is with them, I'm gonna pull up their tractor and move it, not dragging it, because sometimes they like to lay eggs under their nesting boxes when some of the hay from their boxes falls on the ground. So just make sure you don't crush any of those precious, precious fresh eggs. Now that the fence is set up at their new paddock and we have like our entrance marked, I'll show you how I utilize these extra support poles that aren't set up to the fence. It's great because if you have them at the corners of your pre-existing pasture and you leave them when you pull it up, you know where your pasture line ends. So there's like a clean line of fresh grass and soiled grass. So yeah, that's just a great rule of thumb. Leave those up while you pull up your poles and you'll be thankful because you'll have like really continuous nourished pasture all the way down your paddock. All right, now that the egg layers fence is up, time to do the same thing. Get the extra support post put in, energizer hooked up, get them food and water, all freshened up. And yeah, then they'll be good to go. Thank you so much for coming along with me today on doing my chicken chores. I hope you picked up some tips for when you set up your Premier One fencing. If you have any questions for me, please throw them in the comment section below. And if you have any tips for me, I'd appreciate those as well. I'd love to hear from newbies and pros alike. If you enjoyed this video, we have a bunch more chicken and general homesteading content coming up, so make sure you hit the subscribe button and we'll see you all soon.